Let's talk a little bit about connecting Overture 5 to an external MIDI synth. What I've done here is connect it up to my Eurorack Modular, but it could be any MIDI synthesizer that you have, or MIDI synthesizers, depending on how many channels of MIDI you want to send out. First thing you want to do is make sure that your MIDI interface is enabled that you're going to be using. So I'll take a look at my MIDI settings here and going audio MIDI setting, and I can see I've got quite a few of them. They're all enabled. Now, Overture also has a number of predefined output device settings here that can be set to all these different synthesizer types that they have stored in templates. Unfortunately, these are from Overture 4, I think, and they're not really active now, so that when you select them, you can't really get the synthesizer configurations of the one you select here to show up in your settings. For some reason, they still only really support the display of general MIDI, which is a little bit confusing. Hopefully, in future release, they'll have full support for all these different synthesizers and let us add our own templates. So we've seen that's okay. Now the next thing we want to do is select a MIDI interface to play the music that you have put in. To do that, you do it very much like the way that we've selected sample plugins. Go and select the output device, and instead of going to software instrument, I want to select MIDI device now, and that should show me all the MIDI devices that I have selected, and I'll select the one that I know I've got connected to my synthesizer. And all these other settings in terms of names that are general MIDI based, it doesn't matter. They have no effect because you're actually connecting to your synthesizer. And here, my library associations, there are none because they're really not supported yet. So that's all you have to do to make the MIDI assignment. And now I'm ready to play. So obviously, synthesizers playing, but this is a modular. So there are a few other things we can look at that you might not think about when you're controlling just a regular synthesizer. But modulars, especially the Eurorack modulars that I'm using here, have certain functions that are a little different than what you might be expecting if you've never used them. So let me bring up the setting that I have here. This is actually playing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different modules, or at least 8 modules are required to do what I did here, plus the MIDI interface and obviously the computer running Overture. So the first thing, obviously, Overture is going to connect up to my MIDI interface. Then the MIDI interface is going to connect up, in this case, because I have a 5-pin DIN connecting device. MIDI cable go into that. Now, modular synthesizers work on the principle of control voltage, not MIDI signals. So that MIDI input has to be converted to voltages somehow that are going to control my modular. And that's exactly what this module does. And almost anyone who's doing MIDI on Eurorack or any modular synthesizer is going to have some kind of MIDI to CV control voltage converter. So this takes that MIDI in, and for each MIDI note, it's going to convert that to a 1 volt per octave scaled voltage that's going to be sent to whatever you want. In this case, I'm sending it to the actual oscillator, the sound source, which takes a 1 volt per octave input so I can control and map the notes in my Overture 5 piece to voltages that are actually going to play my module. Now, that's just going to have this module play notes. I also then need a way to turn notes on and off. And to do that, I can do one of two things here, or at least that's what I'll show in this video. The simplest thing is these MIDI to CV converters will translate the note on, note off to a gating voltage, an on-off voltage. And that on-off voltage can then be set to this voltage controlled amplifier, and that amplifier, this is actually a mixer combined with that, and that amplifier is going to control basically the volume of the signal, audio signal that's fed into it. All right. So I'm going to take the audio out of my oscillator. That's what the red lines here mean. And I'll feed that audio into a filter so I can make the sound a little bit nicer than just a straight oscillator sound. And I'll control that filter with some kind of modulation source. Here I have a module that puts out a sine wave, so I'm going to control the frequency modulation input of this filter with a sine wave. Also, the oscillator source has some inputs, and I have some low frequency oscillating source that I'll send in a triangle wave to control the timbre function of this uh, oscillator a little bit, just to get some variation in the sound. Once I've got my sound in my little mixer here, I'll throw the output into a reverb unit, and then from the reverb unit, I'll throw it to my output module, which then will send the stereo signal to my audio interface, which is what you'll hear here. Now, I'm not recording through Overture because that doesn't record audio yet, unfortunately. Hopefully soon it will. I'm recording through another device as I create the video. So that's basically what's going on here. Only thing was I didn't actually connect up my modulating source to the filter. You can hear the difference once I send that modulating source. The filter before was static. It had the same sound. Now when I put this modulating source on it, when I play, you'll hear I'm going to have a much more varied dynamic sound. So let's just do that once. Hey, that's a lot nicer, right? A lot of variation. We can hear that that filter was being dynamically controlled, and that's one of the great things you can do so easily with a modular. So many functions of both sound and control are so easily changed through manipulating all of these control voltage functions. Now, what you're hearing still is just a pretty non-musical on-off gate going on here. The volume is the same. I varied the timbre through the filter, but the volume is not particularly musical. I want to do something here so that I can dynamically change my volume like I do with CCs in Overture on the sample plugins. How would I do that using a modular setup? Well, it's dependent upon the ability to take your CC information from Overture that's going along in the MIDI stream and also translate not only the pitch and the gating, but also the CC information somehow. So I can use that, translate that continuous controller information to continuous voltage that I can somehow apply as some modulating source somewhere here, as it turns out, to our voltage controlled amplifier to change volume or change any parameter through this continuous controller information. So it just so happens that this MIDI interface I have here can learn this CC, the last one it hears, it learns it, and then from then on, you can take that information, Instead of gate now, I'm going to take the information instead of from the gate, I'm going to take it instead from this CC output, and I'm going to drive that into the control of my amplifier. And that control and that amplifier, as this gets low to high, it's going to open up, and the mixer will basically increase. The mixer output from that channel will increase in volume. So how do I do that? So I went back to Overture, and what I did is I set up CC7, my volume, and I'm going to draw in now a curve that's going to map to a volume that's going to be translated over to control the volume of the amplifier, and hence the volume of the music that you're going to hear. Now, if I play this now, I set the volume of this to 0. I've also set the MIDI interface to learn the volume controller. And if I play, you're not going to hear anything because I'm set to 0. So now let's do something and just draw in some volume profile, freeform for now, and maybe, oops, let's kind of draw that in some way that you'll be able to hear it easily as we play. So there you can hear the volume of the piece is now being controlled, as we would expect in a plugin, by CC7, only I've actually done that through converting it to voltage and using that voltage as the controller through a voltage controlled amplifier. And if I had a MIDI interface that could do more than 1 CC, and some of them are out there like that, I could do a lot more sophisticated control of the modular through Overture, through maybe a few CCs at the same time. But the bottom line here is it looks like Overture is going to be perfectly fine for controlling external synthesizers. The only issue that I think we have to look at here is whether or not Overture can support MIDI timecode so that it can do complete syncing both internally and externally to MIDI. I'm not convinced it can do that yet, but hopefully they'll support that soon.